Hello, and you're very welcome to Geography Talks with me, Tom O'Connell. This episode is part of our podcast series where we discuss the issues of the day in all things geography, as well as helping students prepare for their geography exams. In today's podcast, as Hurricane Henri makes landfall in the US, we will take a look at how and why hurricanes form. We examine hurricanes that have hit Ireland over the years. We discuss the impacts of climate change on hurricane patterns. As always, if you want to send in any questions or queries, you can email me at geographytalksireland@gmail.com and we'll get to them at the end of the next episode. Now, at the time of recording, Hurricane Henri made landfall on the east coast of the United States of America. While we wait and see what will unfold, we're going to take a look at the journey so far of Hurricane Henri. Firstly, though, I think we should do some explaining and start with the word hurricane itself. A hurricane is a type of tropical storm, and a tropical storm is a circular storm that forms over warm areas of our oceans. And depending on where they form, tropical storms are given a different name. Hurricanes are tropical storms form over the North Atlantic Ocean and the Northeast Pacific Ocean. Tropical cyclones is the name given when formed over the South Pacific and Indian Ocean. And if a storm forms over the Northwest Pacific Ocean, then it will be called a typhoon. In Ireland, the UK, and in the United States of America, we would always have hurricanes here. The only difference between all three, though, is the location where they start. So how then do they actually form? When warm, moist air over the ocean water rise, it's replaced by cooler air. The cooler air itself then warms and starts to rise, allowing more cool air to fill the gap. This cycle causes huge storm clouds to form. The clouds then rotate as the Earth spins, and they effectively organize themselves into a circular system. And then if the process continues, the storm clouds are going to grow, the wind speed gets faster, and once the wind speeds are faster than 118 kilometers an hour, this organized system is classified as a Category 12 hurricane on the Beaufort scale. But hurricanes themselves have 5 different categories depending on wind speed. Now, this is measured on the Saffir-Simpson scale. The highest, which would be a Category 5 hurricane, indicates wind speeds faster than 252 kilometers per hour. And something to keep in the back pocket for your next table quiz. The fastest recorded hurricane speed was 345 kilometers an hour, and it was recorded from Hurricane Patricia in October 2015. And Hurricane Patricia also holds the record for the fastest intensification. So in a single 24-hour period, the wind speed went from 140 kilometers an hour to 335 kilometers an hour. Turning back, though, to look at Hurricane Henri for a moment. And I suppose it originated in what we could classify as a low pressure system just northeast of Bermuda on August 16th, and it started as a tropical depression. About a day later then, the system strengthened. Henri continued to slowly move south, and then it later started tracking southwest, all the while continuing to strengthen. Soon afterwards then, strong wind shear weakened Henri slightly, but eventually it strengthened into a Category 1 hurricane. Now, thankfully, before it made landfall in the United States, it had weakened back to a tropical storm, and it made landfall on August 22nd in Westerly in Rhode Island. I think, though, the one that Irish people will be most familiar with is Hurricane Ophelia. And Ophelia hit Ireland in October 2017. Now, for starters, the hurricane season of 2017 itself was unusual. It was the first time since 1893 even that 10 named hurricanes occurred in a single hurricane season. What's more is Ophelia moved northeast from its starting point down in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, which was, if we draw a line between the Canary Islands in America straight across, it was roughly halfway there. So maybe a small bit towards the Canaries than it was to America, but that's so you can get a bit of a visualization in your head. Now, this was highly unusual, as hurricanes tend to move northwest towards America and Canada, where the waters will be a bit warmer and we would have winds pulling in that direction. We always hear about hurricanes and strong storms hitting the likes of Florida, hitting the likes of New York, Rhode Island, up along that coast. So this was a little bit different. Now, occasionally, the jet stream, which is a big air mass, that'll carry hurricanes northeast from the Atlantic. But usually, they have reduced in intensity and wind speed, and they're no longer classified as hurricanes by the time they will get to Ireland. Ophelia became the farthest east that a hurricane was recorded in the Atlantic basin. The highest gust recorded from Ophelia in Ireland was 156 kilometres an hour. Now, that was recorded in Roach's Point in Cork. Ophelia, of course, had devastating impacts on the areas that it hit. In Ireland, 3 people sadly lost their lives, and there was major storm damage due to the fallen trees, as well as power outages across the country. But also, the hurricane fanned wildfires on the Iberian Peninsula. The dust from these wildfires, as well as dust carried from the Sahara Desert, turned skies across the UK red for a short period of time. Now, Ophelia had been tracked by Methaden 5 days in advance of hitting Ireland. And what this did is it allowed for warnings to be given and for local response services to prepare. In addition then, after a red warning was issued, the National Emergency Coordination Group convened and they ordered schools to shut on Monday the 16th of October. Most schools actually stayed shut on the Tuesday as well, so that they could assess any damage that had occurred. HSE appointments were cancelled. Most bus services and other public transport services were cancelled. Postal services and court sittings were cancelled. It was not safe to be outside. But following on from Ophelia then, in Ireland in particular, we began to look at the prospect for future hurricanes in Ireland, as well as the role that climate change is playing in all of this. Now, while it's very hard to predict the long-term future when things are changing as they are, what we do know is that in the past, Ireland had always been hit by remnants of hurricanes, but we avoided much of the damage because they had weakened and they weren't hurricanes by the time they hit Ireland. But in recent years, we have seen more frequent and stronger storms and hurricanes hitting Ireland. Lorenzo comes to mind. One theory behind the change that we're seeing is ocean warming. Now, that's obviously happening because of climate change. Now, as I said earlier, hurricanes form over warm ocean water. Now, if our oceans are warming up, it means that the areas that hurricanes can form in, that's getting bigger and wider. And that makes it possible for hurricanes to form further east in the Atlantic. And then, instead of getting tracked west to America, they get dragged towards Ireland by our prevailing southwesterly winds and as well as the jet stream. Now, I'm sure by now you're all wondering, how do hurricanes get their names? Well, it's not actually as glitzy and glamorous as you might think. Each year, the World Meteorological Organization generates and maintains a list of hurricane names, and they're used for that season. Here in Ireland, Methaden works with the UK meteorological grouping to determine names, usually coming off those lists as well. Names will always be released prior to the hurricane season. Henri obviously is the first, actually I think it would be the third named storm. The first one, I think that's probably come to international attention though at the moment. But well, I suppose we'll hope that more storms don't come, but I think it probably is inevitable. But we're going to leave it there for this podcast. So I do hope you've enjoyed it. As always, I do hope above all else that you found it interesting and educational. If you do have any questions, send them in to me, Galway Talks, or Geography Talks Ireland at gmail.com. But until next time, slán agus go to my gut.